If you just joined, this is the form for the webinar. If you're new, really welcome, and thank you very much for entrusting us with your precious morning or a good chunk of it. You're all on mute, so you can make as much noise as you like. And also, if you have questions and stuff like that, a good idea is to jot them down as you go along, and then bring them up at the end. Around about 5 past, 10 past, I shall be. I'm just fiddling with the recording device here. We have a desk recording going. I'll be making some time for a Q&A, and so come back at me with your comments, your thoughts, your own experiences even, and I'll read them out. We'll finish bang on, or I'll aim to finish bang on at 15:15, and if I've got any questions outstanding, that I'll be sure to actually I'll stick around, and if you can stick around, then I'll answer your question. If you have to go, I totally understand, but we will aim to finish it near as darn it 15:15. So here we are, 9:31, and I think we'll get going. So welcome to How to Do an Interview and Get Honesty in Return. This is a pet topic of mine because having been subjected, as I'm sure you have been, to interviews, both good and bad. I've had grillings, I've had easy rides. Having been in the field of behaviour and feelings and what people do to duck out of telling the truth, I've realised, as I'm sure you have, that interviews are not a brilliant way to get people to be themselves and thus tell the truth. So I'm going to be going into what an interview can and cannot be, the problems that interviews kick up, some questions about questions. Are they a waste of time? Are they really as helpful as we sometimes make out? And how we actually encourage people to tell lies about themselves, and how to obviously not do that. Also, how to get the truth. So I'm not just going to be talking about problems, I'm going to be talking about how to get to the bottom of some of these things, and what listening can do that questions never can. And then so there's something also about making interviews much more practical than they traditionally are. And then feedback, why we should be giving it in the interview and not after. Okay, my overall aim with these things, and people who've been hanging around for a bit will know that what I'm trying to do is to stimulate some thought, but promote simplicity above all, to demystify some little bits and pieces of psychology, and to provoke you to experiment with something. But that this time comes with a health warning, because obviously there are other people involved in the interview process, but I'm going to be coming back to that in a minute. So for now, I'm going to switch off the camera. I'll switch it back on again for the Q&A, and that way you can you don't have to look at my ugly mug. You can concentrate on the screens. So first off, what is an interview, and what can it never be? Well, it's supposed to be a revealing conversation, but what actually ends up happening is that people end up describing or portraying an idealized version of themselves. And what's interesting, though, is that more senior people don't get interviewed, do they? And I often get comments, and I hear stories about how senior people tend to be, well, they don't get interviewed because it's seen as rather patronising for somebody who has got to that level of things. What's interesting, and that also is the case, is that we don't interview the people who are sort of at the top of the corporate ladder, and people who are elsewhere, who are the tradespeople, manual workers, cleaners, support staff. In the first case, we tend to sort of wine them and dine them and have them for meetings, for discussions, but not interviewed. And the people on the right, the support staff, the people who are actually hands-on, fixing, building, making, we just actually ask to see their work. I'm going to come back to that a bit later. So it's a ritual. An interview is a traditional rite of passage that gives an indication about potential, but very little evidence. So it could be a chance, though, to get a reading on reality, on what a person is actually like. So what has to change? Well, I'm going to give you a collection of ideas to play around with, lots of experiments to do. But please, as I said earlier, this is the health warning. You will end up on the corporate naughty step, particularly with your HR colleagues and business partners, if you don't involve them in this. So please, if you want to try some of this stuff out, do it in collusion with HR, with your recruitment people, and go at it like that. So, first of all, what are the interview problems? What problems do interviews kick up, or that whole model of recruiting people? Well, the first thing is that it promotes selectors to expert status. It makes them into fortune tellers. The worst part is that people actually begin to believe that they're really good at it, that they have some sort of divine judgment. And I've heard a lot of particularly older people, in which I count myself in that group, and older, well, of course, I can always spot somebody, or I'm very good at, and that makes me shudder. Because actually, they think they're going on gut, and they think that's the best way to go about things. These very senior people, when they're recruiting for people elsewhere in the organisation, very rarely see the output of their errors. They don't often have to live with the consequences. The problem with interviews is that they actually put all the eggs in one basket for a selector. It's a kind of game of chess for the selector. You get people who are very astute and who do really listen. So really, it's a very chancy game of dice that only lasts 2 or 3 hours, maybe more like a game of chess, and then we make our minds up. It also happens to be really nerve-inducing for candidates because, well, they want to get the job. We all want to look good. So on one hand, you have a selector who thinks they're a fortune teller and can look into this person's mind, and on the other side, you get a rather nervous, jumpy person who may be covering it up extremely well, but nevertheless is trying to put best foot forward. And so the result is that nobody acts real. And so I think what actually happens is that you get this rather unpleasant game of cat and mouse. The interviewer is trying to hunt down the interviewee, the real version, but often the mistakes. What do I need to know about this person that will enable me probably to reject them? Can I find anything wrong? So even before we've got to know the person, we can even begin to know the person, the setup of interviews, the expert and the victim is flawed. And bearing in mind that very senior people and the manual kind of get stuff done, fix things people don't really get interviewed. So now I want to come on to questions. So that's the difficulty that I have with the whole premise of interviewing. I think the only really good question is tea or coffee. Would you like a tea or a coffee? That actually gets the truth. And strangely, although it sounds silly, it really relaxes people. It makes them feel welcome. The reaction that you get is highly likely to be something to do with the real person. Often interviewers and interviewers alike get stuck in this system. And the system is, how can I devise the killer question? And the poor interviewee on the other side of town is thinking, how can I devise the best possible answers that will make me look good? At the back of every interviewee's mind is, how much of the truth do I tell? And do I trust my interviewer to look beyond the obvious, to look beyond what looks like a really lousy period of my career to why it really happened? How much of the truth will I actually tell? So questions, another problem with questions is that they produce a huge amount of detail and stories. And actually what happens is that a lot of time in the interview gets soaked up with verbiage, just with a lot of narrative. And the worst of it is that questions actually then, as I said, give people the opportunity to start to tell fibs, to embellish. And there's one question in particular that I have a real allergic reaction to when I hear it. Tell me about a time when you da 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 da. And we think that that's going to get evidence. It is not. It is going to get storytelling. That's all these questions get, is stories. Now, some of them will be true, of course. I'm not calling all interviews and myself liars. But what we will get is a polished pebble. And even the famous question, tell me about a time when you realised one of your shortcomings and what did you do about it? Well, of course, we're going to come up with shortcomings that have a resolution. We're not going to give a case study that turns out badly. So by asking questions, the questioner is getting diamonds, or pebbles polished into diamonds. And then there's the business about looking for the problems, and which I've already alluded to, looking for the holes of the in the CV. This is I think, a really negative pursuit. And I think there is something much more interesting to be gained if you really, really want to find out by somebody. And it's not by trawling through their CV and testing them on what they've put in it. So I'd like to describe how to go about that. And there are three main ways that we can make interviews a possibility where somebody can be really real with us. So, enter these three things. First of all, this one is a favourite because the truth is that we all have holes in our lives. We all have holes in the CV. And actually, sometimes when our lives were going wrong, although it felt bad at the time, and we will do anything often to cover these things up, it's often when we learn the most about ourselves. So when life goes wrong, that's when we grow, if that doesn't sound too flaky. So how do we find out about somebody's problems and how they really solve them, not the polished version? Well, the solution, or one solution that I've come across and devised, is to actually share a story. Is to share a story about something that went wrong for you. So this is the interviewer sharing a vulnerability and what they got out of it, and actually doing their very best to tell the truth about it, so that the interviewee can see, actually, maybe this isn't one of the interviews where I really have to stay on stage. The idea is to, like with the cup of tea and coffee, is to give the person a chance to relax and to really be themselves. And if the interviewer can portray themselves as in a very good job and yet faulty, that is more likely to get the interviewee to admit to being faulty as well. And it can sound something like this, here at Best Ball Bearings, we value honesty over polish. So I'd like to share a story, and I hope you'll do the same. And the game is, choose a bit of your CV that you wished at the time hadn't happened. Or you might still wish it now. I'll go first. And then you tell the story. When they are listening to you, you will discover a lot about how they judge people and work with people who are having problems by their reactions to your story. You might even get them empathizing. Wow, what a bonus that would be. You will learn a lot about their sensitivity, and then you'll learn a lot about their honesty afterwards. So that's sharing the story. The second possibility, and this is especially good when you are getting a lot of words, is to convert the narrative. If you have asked a competency-based question, or the person is a polished presenter and they have started to quote-unquote present to you, then you need to get them to stop that, to stop telling you the stories. And sometimes it's tricky because people are really glued to them. This happens a lot in coaching sessions, and I'm sure if you're a coach, or indeed in any sphere that your job might take you into, you probably get a lot of description. And then I did this, and then I did that, and then she said this, and then she said that. And then this is how I would handle it. So what you do is you convert it into an experience. You give them the chance to show how hands-on they are. In other words, do they know how to have the conversation that they're describing? Do they come across as people who often use that kind of language? Does it come easily to them to recall what they actually said? It is fiendishly difficult to invent detail like that. It's easy to invent stories. So the watchwords for me are show me now, or what did that sound like? And these are conversion words, not watchwords, conversion words. Show me now. So what did that sound like? I'm him. Do it to me now. Yes, say what you said to him to me now. Run it past me now. Now, at first, often people won't get what you mean, and they will carry on describing. So you might have to persist 2 or 3 times to give them the idea, and you might even have to explain, no, I don't want you to describe it. I'd really like you to show me now. And then see what they do. It's a very truthful way, I think, of putting people under some pressure without being mean about it. This isn't a memory test, because if they didn't do it, they don't have to talk about it. But at least, and so you're not enticing them to tell lies, you're enticing them to show you what they're really like when they're doing stuff, when they're having conversations. But be prepared to stay with it until they understand what you mean. You might even want to announce at the beginning of the interview or the meeting session, look, we're going to get very practical. I'm not going to ask you for stories. I'm going to ask you to show me how you handled yourself or the circumstances. And the third way to get a real impression of the person is to create an experience. Now, what this will do is it'll give you and them a chance to work with you. And there are a couple of forms of the exercise. Firstly, one we call work the problem, and we've done this in development centres in banking, where these are very theoretical, very bright, highly intelligent people used to numbers and spreadsheets and deals and stuff like that. But what they're not so strong on always is the people side of things, is actually doing things. So what we've done here is to create an experience, and literally 15 minutes is all it need take, that actually tests how they listen, how they think, how they work stuff out, collaboration, abstracting ideas, even empathy and patience. So that's the gig, and basically, first of all, make sure that they've signed an NDA, because then the interviewer, or you, if you're the interviewer, are going to talk about a real problem that you have that you're needing to sort out. So you're going to bring something real, initials, names, whatever you want, to the table. And you say to the person, look, we've got 15 minutes and I want to get somewhere new with this problem that I have. How do you want to do it? And then it's game on. You see the person in real action helping you as they would were they to become a colleague to sort out a problem that you really have. And here's an important element of this. So they they listen to your problem, they might reflect back, and are they coaching you? Are they giving you lots of advice? Are they comparing it to one of their own experiences? Before you do this, you will certainly want to figure out, how do I want this to turn out? What would good look like? What sort of people do I want to work with, or does this organisation need? Do we need coaches? Do we need problem solvers? Do we need listeners? And then you'll get a real impression here. There is no way anybody can prepare for this other than through experience. Now, once they've talked about the problem, this is the really good bit, I think. You then give them 2 or 3 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on how lavish you are for time, for a nice think, and you have a think. So this is the second bit of work the problem. And this piece gives them the chance to sit and think about some feedback that they have for you. So you're going to invite them to give you feedback, and you will be giving them feedback. This is a very rich step, potentially, of an interview. If you think about it, you're giving somebody an opportunity to be silent, to use that woo-woo phrase, really West Coast, to be in the moment, to be really there, to calm down, whilst they think about some feedback for you, and whilst you think what you want to tell them about how they made you feel when you were working with them for 10 minutes. And then, of course, you get to give them feedback. You can do it in either order, and they get to give you feedback. And as a result of this, what do you find out? Well, you get to find out in feedback their humility, their honesty. Are they brave? Do they have a dense of humour? That was not on purpose. I have a dense of humour. Open-mindedness, judgment, sensitivity, essentially EQ. Do they know how to give feedback? And do they know how to take it? Are they brave enough to hear something less than nice about themselves or awkward live in front of a stranger? Now, if you want to put them under a little bit of extra pressure, there is also a structure that we use, which I'm going to try. No, I haven't actually got it written up. So, which is essential. I'm going to see if I'm going to scroll it up on here to mention, firstly, the feeling. How did you feel, or when? Hang on. Yeah, about. So, how did you feel when they did a particular behaviour? How they felt and what about? And then they can tell you how they felt when you did something. Maybe you were interrupting them. Maybe you were silent for a long time. Maybe you were rejecting their ideas. But try to get them to give an upside and a downside, and you do the same. So that's how you can actually get a huge amount of truth from people without having to drill them on their CVs and their experiences and get them giving you lots of long stories that you may or may not know are true. And finally, this is the one that often gets missed out, and this lip service, and I don't have the chance today. I mean, it's a whole webinar in itself. The final piece of the puzzle to get truth out of people is listening. Interviewers spend a lot of time reading signs. We try and figure out, what is that person on about? Were they telling me the truth? Is that really what happened? How did that work? How did they feel about that? What would they do next time? All of those questions that sometimes we get not to ask because it doesn't seem appropriate or it seems too personal, they can be resolved with empathy. Because empathy actually clarifies the signals, that the writing on the wall that we see, that we wouldn't get the truth to were we to ask. Because, for example, if you're to ask somebody, and how did you feel when you had to say, when you had to make those 15 people redundant? Oh, well, it was all part of the job, or, well, not great, but actually, if you empathise with somebody, you'll really get beneath the surface. And that, for me, is what interviewing is supposed to be all about. And we have a particular way of doing this, which I wrote up earlier. And that is to reflect on 3 pieces of information that you have almost certainly spotted. You might not have noticed it, but you will have seen it. And this is the time to call it to mind. How they felt, or how they're feeling about that thing, what that feeling is about, and why. Now, in practical terms, you can use it in 3 broadly speaking, 3 different scenarios when you're talking with somebody. Either when they call out a very strong position on something. Oh, well, I always I've always believed in, etc., etc., etc. That could get the response from you, the empathic response. You sound convinced. Convinced about that way of doing things. I guess that's because you've seen it work many times. That statement forces your interviewee to really reflect on what they've just said, and I will bet, penny to a pinch of salt, you will get some corrections and a lot more subtlety about what they really believe, because what they gave you the first time out was a show, was a tape recording. The second opportunity to use empathy is when somebody is hesitant or not sure. Now, this is where we have a chance to really get beneath the skin, but we need to be very respectful. And as with every time that we interview, we're not empathise with somebody. We're not trying to catch them out on their feelings. We're trying to show them that we've noticed, that we've come off script, and we've seen something real happening in the room at a human level. With somebody who is hesitant, it sounds like you were worried about that. You sound unsure about how that situation went, or how you handled it. I guess that's because, or I imagine that's because, so you're teasing. No, you're giving the person an opportunity to tell you a bit more of the way it really was. But because of the way you're doing it, in other words, not with questions, because you're mentioning feelings, because you're kind of giving them almost a multiple choice, a humble hypothesis, it gives them something to play with, and they know what level of truth you are prepared to go to. And because empathy is a caring gesture, it's a gift of understanding, then people will also trust you. You, of course, as the interviewer, have to be worthy of that trust and to treat what they say as a real peep behind the curtain. So you need to handle that real material carefully. And then the last one is repetition. This is particularly handy if somebody keeps on going on about something and you're thinking, why do they keep on banging on about that thing? So find out. You can't ask somebody, God, you do go on about that, or you've said that quite a few times, but you can say, it sounds like that particular thing's important to you. You've mentioned it a few times. I guess that's because... So you're pointing out that they have repeated themselves and that it's of interest to you. And you'd be right. When people repeat themselves, it's often because they're either not used to being heard or they don't think you are listening. Or they're worried that you won't listen. You can send them a confirmation receipt of your listening by reflecting back. It sounds like you're adamant, or that thing really bugs you because dun 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 dun. Again, I think part of this, the helpfulness of listening, is that it slows down the action. It gets people thinking, but it doesn't force them to it, it draws them to it. This is a lot harder work for the interviewer. And this will take, if this is the route you take with your interviewing, or you want to start experimenting with this, you will have to spend some time and energy and money retraining your battery of interviewers. Because this is not traditional. And it's tough on the interviewer. They have to be a lot more skillful interpersonally and a lot more knowing of themselves as well. There is, if you want a taster of this, there's a video that I produced. There's a couple. To my astonishment, when I was preparing this yesterday, I realised that I hadn't actually made a 2-minute model, which are these animated video shorts that we make. I hadn't actually made one on empathy. Shock horror. I'm going to now. But this one here, you might want to take a photograph with your phone, or it might even scan it straight into YouTube if you've got a smartphone. And then you can look at this one. This is, I think, how to turn an argument into a discussion. Anyway, you will find about 3 or 4 of our videos, including this one, focuses on empathy for a portion of it, and it'll give you some language and some how-tos on it. Okay, we're 10:05, near as darn it. It'd be really interesting for me, at any rate, to hear or to read what questions you might have, and so give me an idea. What questions, what thoughts do you have? How does this, what I've been saying, sit with you? It's question time. Have a think, and I'll stay quiet for a minute. And all you have to do is to put these into the question tab in your control panel. What questions do you have on any of this. Okay, so Donna's volunteered something here. She says it's not a. I'll just turn the camera on so I can say hi again. Hi again. So Donna says. Yes, Donna. Not a question, but my colleague's favourite question is, what is your favourite ABBA song? And this usually gets people relaxed and starts a good discussion. I like that. Actually, I'm going to put that up in the top 3 along with Coffee or Tea. Good one, Donna. Kasha, a bit that worries me is the bit that comes after. I guess that's because what if you have no idea? Say a bit more about that, Kasha. I'm not quite sure. I don't get your question. I'm sure I will. Nikki, how do you go about understanding candidates' learning agility? Well, Nikki, that comes from when you give somebody feedback. What you could do, if you have time on your side, it's a good question, is to then get them to do it again. So you might say to somebody, I'm making this up as I go along. You might say, I was really impressed by, how you described how you described my problem, but I found I got lost in a lot of words. I switched off when you were playing it back to me. Have a go at playing it back to me in fewer words. And then you find out, do they know how to change their behaviour? So that'll give you a gauge at any rate. Hopefully that works for you, Nikki. Greg, Paul, have you also come across the lab profile, which also departs from the traditional interviews? To my great shame, Greg, no. But you can be sure I'm going to look it up straight after this. Joe, will this actually make the candidate more nervous because it is not what they're expecting, so throws them? I suppose it could. Although I think if the interviewer also admits that it's a new way of doing things for them, and that so they make themselves somewhat vulnerable, that could probably really help. So maybe admitting how new it is for everybody and giving people plenty of chance to warm up. And I love the ABBA question, so I'm going to steal that, and I'm sure she won't mind you do. Diane, does it... thanks, Paul. Interesting, especially about how you introduce the feedback. Does it ever feel difficult introducing a personal story in the process? I'm trying to extract myself from this because it doesn't feel difficult for me, but that's me. But what we've done with other people, when we were preparing other raters in the when we run assessment centres, is we actually go through their stories with them first to make sure it's a good sort of package size story and that they're telling it in a truthful way. Because some people don't actually understand how much of the truth you want, so that can take some preparation. Hope that helps, Diane. John asks, have you worked with any companies using this approach? We've worked with a bank to get them started in telling the truth, getting their candidates to telling the truth. But I'm rather hoping that we might be able to work with yours, John. And in fact, John, we've been talking about that for some time, haven't we? So let's see if we can get that in. Nicholas, hi, this was very interesting. However, I'm wondering how we can change the current situation where people are having to apply online, thus not even getting to the interview. Wow, that's a toughie. The first thing that comes to mind is that you get them to tell a story. and probably get them to tell a story that they think didn't turn out well, that does not have a happy ending. You could see if you get any kind of truth from that. What else? 10. Miranda, lots of your tips are about EQ, empathy, etc. But what about getting reliable info on hard skills such as organising, planning and project management, etc., or even drive and determination? Well, I don't think there's a question invented that could get to their drive and determination. But in terms of hard skills, organising. Yeah, the things, you're right, the things that you mentioned, organising, planning, project management, you're not going to get in this kind of interview, but you're not going to get that with questions either. So I think what I would want to do is to get the person in, and if I'm interested in that, is to actually get them in, as we have done, and get people doing it. So this sounds more like material for a selection centre, and then you absolutely can test all of these, and we have in development centres, and I have no reason to suspect that you couldn't do it with a selection centre. Cornelia, in what way can you do it in volume recruitment? You can actually compress this down, and I've actually been as a fly on the wall in interview situations where I, in my mind, was, and in fact, one of the places where I have seen this in action, and in fact, John, who asked a question a few minutes ago, his organisation actually does get people doing things as well as interviewing them, which I think is the really cool bit. So they get them to answer a telephone call. On a telephone, and the interviewer is in the other room. So, and they are doing volume recruitment. So it is possible to make these things practical. And they also do other practical exercises where there is no preparation possible. And their interviews last about, I think I seem to remember, a couple of hours, and they take people like a 10 or 15 at a time. So it's possible. Okay, it's 12 minutes past 10. I've still got some questions outstanding. I'm just going to go to the summary screens now, and then you can get away if you need to, and I'll come back and answer the remainder of the questions in a moment. So, in summary, firstly, questions will just prompt more questions. When you ask a question out loud of an interviewee, they will be asking themselves, how much of the truth do I tell them? Which bits do I tell them? Going back to the manual labouring, not analogy, but parallel, I think getting people to do things, just as we do with senior people, CEOs, CFOs, all the C-suite and tradespeople, that is where this thing, where interviewing could really go. Getting people to do things. Show me. And sharing feedback. Giving people the opportunity to hear about themselves there and then seeing how they react, I think is a really valuable exercise in getting some truth. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed it, got something from it, and can take something away to experiment with. As I said, please work with your recruitment people and HR if you're not in there yourselves to test this stuff out. Do some dry runs amongst people who are already in the organisation to try these things out, and try it out in different scenarios and find out. You try it out with people just try giving recruiters, say, just half an hour coaching on it and see how they do. They might take to it really well, but you might also have to revisit who does the actual recruitment, the recruitment live. And next webinar, Friday the 23rd of August. I really want to thank, as usual, you for giving us your time, and Nicola, who does all of the database management, make sure you get the correct invitations, and make sure you can get in the room, and the whole of that whole technical piece that I couldn't possibly manage. And yes, I just say have a great weekend, and hopefully see you on the 23rd of August, if not before. If you want to get in touch, of course, you always can. If you have questions, you want to have a natter about something, you want to bounce some ideas off us, please do get in touch. The details, you can get hold of Nicola, ns@paulfury.com, and get a call in the diary. And that's absolutely free, and I'm very, very pleased to hear from you. Otherwise, I will see you soon, and I will now stay on for some more questions, even if you need to disappear. Bye for now. Okay, if I haven't yet answered your question, I'm going to do so now. Okay, Kate, you're saying that you should say you sound a bit worried about that, for example. I guess that's because... Yes, exactly. And Kate, apologies, I mistook for another Kate, who's actually a Kasha, who I know very well. So I apologise for that, Kate. So yeah, you're exactly as you said. You sound a bit worried about that. I guess that's because... Yeah, spot on. Natalie's asking... hi Paul, how do you compare between candidates and decide who will be more suitable after getting the real responses? What do you go by? That means, that's a great question, Natalie. What you actually have to do is to build up a completely different kind of interview sheet, whereby your raters, your interviewers, are actually putting down a response. And the way to design this sheet, very briefly, is 1 to 5 for desirability, and maybe you have listening. The sort of things you got to have is listening, or organizing thoughts, keeping things simple, honesty, and so on. So you maybe have 10 different variables, and then you have 1 to 5 for each of those variables, and then a box for the behavior that they did that got that score. So then when you've got your 5 or 6 candidates, you can actually have a sensible meeting afterwards to say, okay, I gave this person a 3 because this is what she did, or this is what he did. And then you can have a detailed discussion about ratings and behavior. So some quantitative and some qualitative. Okay. Helen asked, how would you train the hiring managers in this technique? Okay. So this is going to require some time for them, and maybe some reselection. I wouldn't say it's training. It's definitely more about them getting some coaching. In how to listen. They will know a lot of these things intuitively, but you need to draw out those possibilities. And so coaching, basically, you can run this in groups, half a dozen people at a time, so it's efficient. And I would suggest you have a session on listening with empathy. You have a session on feedback. You have probably in the same one as the feedback and empathy, you can mix that in with observational skills, and you don't have to use role play. You see, you can actually use a lot of the action that's going on in the room for real. And it's really about honing people's empathy, their ability to be assertive, to give assertive feedback, to talk about their feelings, and their ability to spot stuff while it's happening. And that can all be workshopped. And what I would do is it multiple times. Keep refreshing those skills. Me and my crew, we are constantly doing that with each other. We give each other feedback. We practice empathy between each other because we need to in our work to get our meanings across, even behind the scenes. So by the time we get to do it with clients, it comes a lot easier. Diane, should you prepare the interview for the approach you're going to use beforehand? You will have areas that you go to, Diane, and then have a sort of time zone, and then explain to people what you're going to do. So I suppose this kind of interview is much more open because you're reading out the stage directions. So it's a kind of really open structure, but it does have structure. It does have a framework. I wonder, hopefully, yeah, that should answer your question. Let me know if it hasn't. Here we go. Diane, I introduce a peer panel to the interviewing process, especially for senior people. Candidates are asked to say why they want the job and why they would be good for the role. And the panel have 10 minutes to question them and then report back to the selection team and what they liked, what worried them and what else they would like to find out. Great. Okay. I like that. And another Diane, would this work as well with Diane T? This is, would it work as well with telephone or Skype interviews? I think it does. And in fact, we did that with our associates and we got them to, we talked, but we did a lot. We gave some of them live feedback and empathized in the calls. And that mostly took the calls in a completely different direction, because we were then having a real conversation. We didn't set them tasks. We did that when we actually ran our selection centre, and then it was all about doing and live feedback, basically stuff that you can't prepare. So, to answer John W.'s earlier question, we've done it for ourselves. We've done it in development centres. And it works. People, I think there's one or two of our people here on this webinar, they would testify to the fact that it's actually good fun. It's not easy. It can be quite nerve-wracking as well, to an earlier point that somebody made. But you get to the end of the selection centre and you think, wow, okay, I've really got to know these people. They got to know us and we got to know the interviewees. And I really do think that it's possible to do this in bulk. You just have fewer activities. I'm just seeing if there's any more. Here we go. That's thanks, Greg, for that reference. Kate, her further question was, but my question is, what do you guess? What if you have no idea? That's an interesting. So, okay, so you've got someone in the room with you, Kate, and you think, I can't read this person. You actually tell them that. I'm finding it really hard to read you. You seem, and then guess. And Kate, actually, as I'm talking, I'm thinking, I bet you'd have a hunch, so play the hunch, and it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. But if you have no idea, say so. I'm not sure how you're feeling. I'm finding it difficult to read you. That should do it. Hopefully, Kate, that works for you. I think that's it for the questions. Great. I think that's it. Thank you for sticking around for extra questions. There's a whole load of you in the room. And yes, I look forward to seeing you in August. Have fantastic weekends. All the best. Bye-bye.